Hello everyone, welcome to the Salesforce CPQ video series. In today's session, we would be looking at code documents. I am Sudha Sundaram. I have 12 plus years of experience predominantly in the Salesforce and the Agile world. I have 11 Salesforce.com certifications, which include Application Architect and Salesforce CPQ Specialist. I'm also a Trailblazer mentor. Here are my LinkedIn and Twitter handles. If you'd like to follow me, please feel free to. So far, we covered the C and P aspects of the CPQ, right? We looked at configuring products, pricing products, and now we will look at the Q part of Salesforce CPQ, the code proposal generation. In today's session, we will look about the document generation capabilities of Salesforce CPQ. We would look at an overview of document generation. We would look at what template contents are and how do we create them. We would look at the types of content. I've listed the three mostly used types of content here, the HTML, line items, and code terms. We will take a look at how do we embed additional documentations, document file formats and permissions, and finally, we will touch upon e-signature integration. After we have gone through the process of putting together a code, selecting the right products, applying discounts if necessary, it is time to go ahead and generate a document to put in front of your customer, right? So we have customer information, code information, we have line items, we have product pricing and discounting data, all in our code. So the Salesforce CPQ document engine combines this information all together, merges it into templates in order to allow sales reps to go and generate a professional looking codes and proposal document with a single click. So that is how we generate documents in Salesforce CPQ. So let's quickly jump into our Salesforce CPQ application to see where and how we generate a document. We are in our code right now, and on our code itself, we have quite a lot of information, right? We have some basic code information like code number, the type of the code, the opportunity it's associated to, the account it's being associated to. And if I scroll down, we'll also see some address information like the bill to address and the ship to address here. And if I click on edit lines, it would take us to the code line editor. And here we will see all the code lines that are associated to this particular code. So this has some iPhone 12 products and 15-inch laptop products, which are the code lines associated with this code. And here we also see the quantity, the price, and if there is any additional discount applied, then even that comes here. And we have the net unit price for these products. So all these information is there in the code, right? So once we decide we need to send a code proposal document to the customer, the sales rep can go here and either click on a preview document or generate document to generate the document and send to the customer. So let me go ahead and quickly show you how a document looks like. So when I click on preview document, I see a few things here, like document options. It asks me what document language I want this document to be generated in, the template, the paper size, and down I have the content, the template content itself, which has the code template content here. So once I click on preview, this is how my document would look like. So if I scroll down here, I see a company logo here, and there's a header. This is like a cover letter, which has some information for the customer. And if I scroll down here, I'm seeing who is it prepared for and who is it prepared by. And there is some address information as well here. And if I move down, I see a lot of line items listed here, and they are kind of grouped by product family. And there are some terms and conditions at the end of this document, and finally a signature block. So this is how a typical code document would look like, right? So there are some static content here, there are some dynamic content here. So when I say static content, the date, the expires on, these labels are static, right? And the same for the address information. So the prepared for, the header by itself is a static content, and prepared by is a static content, while the address information itself is a dynamic content. So we are trying to pull it based on the selected code information and try to populate it here. So this is how a typical document would look like. And let us now go and see how do we build and get this document in this particular shape. So we define individual contents first and then work through the process of assembling an entire code template out of it. So if you look at my slide here, I have cover page, customer information, line items, discount detail, and a signature block. So these are individual snippets of contents, right? So first we need to start defining the content itself before we start building the code template out of it. We then link these pieces of content up to a code template. So the reason we do it this way is that we may want to reuse these pieces of content in multiple code templates. So if you see here, I have two code templates and I could reuse the same piece of template content at these two different code templates, right? The content is defined just once and it can be reused across multiple code templates. So if you define these particular content that you see here, the cover page, customer information, line items, discount details, signature block in this nice modular fashion, then that helps us to go ahead and slot them into really as many code templates as we want. And the way we join these up is by creating something called as a template sections that are specific to the code template itself. So this is just really a link between a piece of template content and the code template itself. So if you notice here, I have a code template A and a code template B, and I'm trying to use the same content in a different fashion. You know, I've put a customer information, discount detail, line items, and signature block here, wherein I have just cover page, line items, and signature block in my other code template. But really the linkage here is through the template sections itself. So remember, whenever you're working to define a document, you should start by thinking about what are the individual pieces of content that we need to go into the document first. So get that content generated and then work on slotting them into the actual code template themselves. So the real first step for us to start building a document is by defining the template contents. So to summarize how the document generation works, we start by defining the individual template contents, and we use the sections to link the piece of template content we define to the code template itself. And the same template content can be used in multiple code templates in a similar fashion by using sections to link them, the content to the code template, and finally in generating the code document. What are the different types of content we could generate on Salesforce CPQ? So there are 5 major types of content we could generate, and the 3 most popular ones are HTML, line items, code terms, and the 2 not so frequently used ones are custom, and then we have the template bottom and the template top. Let's look at each of this in detail. So the first one is a HTML, right? So this is really a free form content, almost like your Microsoft Word document with like mail merge fields. You have a static content, and then you have some merge fields to dynamically fold in information specific to the code. A typical example here would be what we saw right now in our demo. So when we were on our code and we tried to generate the code document, we had the prepared for and prepared by, which are the static content, and then we had the address, which was a dynamic content, which is specifically folded in from the code information. The same would be applicable to a cover letter or a cover page, or if you want to add bill to ship to information or even a signature block. So these would all fall under HTML. The next second type of content is the line items. So this is really the details about the code lines, right? The products, the quantities, the price and discount related to it. So the detail about the line items are usually presented in a table format. We could go ahead and group by a product family or anything, any other relevant fields, and also display as separate tables. or we can have them control the columns that we display. So you want a column to be displayed dynamically only on certain conditions, we could do that as well. We would look at it in detail when we jump into the line items content type. The third type is the code term. So code terms are nothing but terms and conditions in simple terminology. So we have some special functionality related to terms and conditions in Salesforce CPQ. This is a little bit more intelligent with dynamic capabilities around the code term content. So the next one is the custom type of content. So this basically allows us to display a visual force page within the section of our code template. The last two, which are more similar to the HTML types, they are template bottom and the template top. So template bottom is typically used for including notes, dates, and final signature information, while template top can be used for including logos like company logos or street address and ship to or bill to details. They operate in a very similar fashion to the HTML type of content. We are back in Salesforce CPQ. Let's quickly take a look at how do we create these template content. So there is a separate object for template content. If you click on that and if you click on new, you'd be able to start building your template content. So if you notice here, we see a type of this content. That's the first question that it asks. And it has all the 6 different types of content that we looked at earlier. We just need to start clicking on whichever we want to get started here. Just gonna hit cancel because I already have template contents created for demo purposes. I'm just gonna pick something and walk you through it. So this is a HTML template content that I built for cover letter, right? So if you notice here, there are quite a few fields. One is the content name itself. Give a name for your template content. And there are some font, text color, type, and font size here. The type typically takes from the type of content you picked earlier in the step. And if you notice here, we have something called as the markup field. So this is where we will be doing all our editing for the HTML sections. So if I click on edit here, you will notice this WYSIWYG editor, and there are quite a bit of formatting controls that you would see here. You could play with all these. There are font sizes, different styles you could use for formatting. There are styling options, which we can use for building your content. And if you also notice here, this is going to be a mix of static and dynamic content here. There are some headers like date, expires on. If I scroll down a little further, there are quite a bit of static content here, phone, email. So these are all going to be the static content. And if you notice here, we see something with these brackets, between the brackets, right? So these are the merge fields, which are typically used for getting the dynamic folding in information from a number of places on your code, like customer informations or any other related information from your code to dynamically get folded into your document. So that's why we use these merge fields first. So in this HTML type of content, you have a mixture of the static and the dynamic content displayed here. One thing very particular to be noted for merged fields is there's a particular syntax for these merged fields that we need to be aware of. Let us quickly jump in back to our slides to look at them in detail. We need the curly brackets around the merge field syntax. We need the exclamation point at the beginning, and then it's object name dot field name. And there are 5 objects that we can source the data from in the HTML sections. So with the HTML template content, we don't need the object's API name, but the shortened name, like that the document engine is expecting. So be careful about the uppercase and lowercase when you give the object name. Ensure you're giving the correct name because Salesforce CPQ is going to be a little fussy about that. And when it comes to the field name, we need the full API name for the syntax here. So if you look at this table here, we have 5 different objects: the code template, the primary contact on the Salesforce CPQ's code object, and then the sales rep on the Salesforce CPQ code object, and the code document. So these are the records we can reference in our merge fields. And this is the second column here gives you how the merge field appearance happens. So it is like exclamatory code dot for code and exclamatory template dot for template followed by your field name, right? So I've given few examples here. So if you want to dynamically fold in a building name from your code, so this is the typical syntax that you would use. You would use the brackets and then you have an exclamatory mark, code dot, because it's going to take it from the code object, and the field it's interested in is the building name. So I've used the fields API name here, sbqq underscore underscore building name underscore underscore c, for instance. The same is applicable for the remainder of the objects that are listed here. So be very careful about the syntax that you use for the merge fields in the HTML section. You could also create formula fields on these objects to replicate data from the other object. For instance, you can create a code formula field to render an opportunity or an account field. This is being mentioned here typically because merge fields in an HTML section can only come from the above mentioned objects here. And one other thing to note is there is no way to directly reference a quote line data in the HTML section. So quote line data is always going to be displayed in the quote line section. So if you remember, in our different types of content, we had HTML and then we had a quote line. So that is what we would be using to get the quote line information. We are back in our Salesforce CPQ application. And one other thing I want to mention here is if you'd like to work with HTML and CSS directly, you can use the source button that you see here and jump into it, and you can directly make the edits as well. So this is typically how we create the HTML type of content. It's not too difficult. You just need to take care of your syntax around the merge fields and determine what content needs to go into this HTML template, have it styled by the way your business wants, and you would be done here. Now that we have our HTML template content ready, let's quickly go ahead and see how do we link this to the code template itself. So I'm going to quickly navigate to the code templates. And I've already created one for the demo purposes, so I'm going to click on that. Let's quickly look at what fields we have here, right? So we have a template name. We have the deployment status. Do you want this to be your default template? So you can have multiple code templates, right? So if you want this to be your default, then you can select this. There is a logo document ID. This is nothing but if you have a company logo which you want to be available in your document, then you could go to your documents folder, upload that particular logo there, and then get the record ID and populate it back here. So this particular template will take that logo document ID and get your image and put it on your document. And then if I scroll down a little further, you will see quite a bit of details. There is some page information here. You can define your page width, how much margin you want, what's your page height, all that can be defined here. And quite a bit of controls around your header footer information. If you want your header or footer to be visible, then you could give all the different styling options for that as well here. And if I move further down, I have some corporate information, which is standard, and then the style information. I can define my font family, the font size, the border color, the shading color, and all that information, and also my group style information here. So there's quite a bit of detail when we come in here to the code template, more with respect to how we want the document to look like, what kind of style, what kind of font, what kind of details we want to go in from a template itself. And then if I scroll down a little further, there are some print options here. We would touch upon some of these later in our session as we go deep into each of these template contents and sections. But just to give you an overview, this is all that we see on the template, code template itself. So now we have a code template. How do we link the template content we created to this particular code template? So for that, if we go into the related, we will see a few sections here. One is lined column, other is a sections, and the third is an additional document. So to just give you an overview what each of these sections mean, line columns is nothing but these are the columns that are going to appear when you have your line item content type being added to this particular code template. And when you have those tables, these are the typical line item columns that might appear either conditionally or always on your code template. And if I scroll down a little further, we see sections. Sections are the typical link between your template content and the code template itself. If you remember, we had talked about this earlier. So for example, we created a cover page HTML template content now. So the cover letter section is going to be the link between the content and this particular code template itself. So if you will see here that I have a section name, and then you see the template itself. So this is my code template. I'm linking the code template with the content. So this is how one single content can be used across multiple different code templates. All you need to do is go ahead and create a section and create the link between the content and the template. And display order is typically the order in which you want this particular section to display. Remember the same best practice that we have talked earlier, give a lot of gaps between them. So if you want to come in and fit in a different section later in time, it's easy without going and renumbering a bunch of them. And similar to what we saw in the template itself, we have quite a bunch of fields around the margin and the border color, and you know, if you want to hide the column header, we could say that here as well. And we'll touch upon this conditional print field later. And then more from look perspective, there are things around page breaks. If you can say whether you want a page break after this particular section, you want before or after or at both places, and things like that. And we also have a filtering information if you would like to filter based on a particular field and value here. So if you look here, we have created a section to link the content that we created to this particular template. So this is how we link a content to a template through a template section. Now that we looked at what HTML template content type is, let's move on with the line item type of content. So the line item type of content is typically used to display the code line data in a table format, right? So in our document, we looked at a table like this with different columns, which typically shows the code line, the product information, the price information, the discount information, the overall price information, and things like that, which are related to the code line data. So that is what a line item section is going to be used for. There are a couple of advanced line item functionalities I would like to touch upon here. So one is a group and subtotals. So we have a field called group in the line items section to group the line items. So what this group field will do is the line item will automatically sort themselves into proper groups and subtotal correctly. If you notice here, what we have done from a configuration standpoint is I had grouped by product family. So what has happened here is if my code lines belong to support and Apple Watch product family, then they get split into two different tables based on the product family. If I have hardware and software, then we would have two more tables with my code line items, categorized into those groups. And we would also see the subtotal information like it is here automatically. So we do not have a necessity to create multiple line item sections to achieve this. We could just do it with one line item section by using this group field to achieve the groups and subtotals. One other advanced line item functionality we have in Salesforce CPQ is conditional print fields. So we could show or hide columns dynamically using this conditional print field. So you can use a code level field to decide whether a particular line column is rendered or not. For example, say for instance, like you have a discount percentage column, line column, right? So we don't want to show this always for all our codes, but we just want for those codes which have a discount applied, because we just don't want to show an empty column, right? So if that is your use case, then you could use the conditional print field to show this particular column only if a particular checkbox is checked. Say, for example, if I have a custom checkbox field created on my code saying show discounts, and as a sales rep, I go and say before generating this code document that please show discounts on my code document. Then what Salesforce CPQ will automatically do is it will automatically go and render this particular line column called discount percentage on your line items table in your code document once it is generated. And if this checkbox is set to false, then this column is going to be suppressed. It will not be shown on your code document. So the only thing that you need to notice, this field needs to contain a Boolean value. It should be a true or false, because a true is going to cause the line item column to render and the false is going to suppress it. So the same functionality can be used on sections as well. You can show or hide a section in the document using the conditional print field, but in the template section. If you use the one that's on the template section, it's going to either show or hide based on the value that you're going to reference here. It's the same condition again here. Use a Boolean value field, which will have either a true or a false. And a typical example here would be like a cover letter needed, right? So you don't want a cover letter to be attached on all your codes. Then you could just have a custom field created cover letter needed on your code, and the sales rep can check that if he wants to include a cover letter on the code document. So then what it would do is it would go ahead and enable the section based on this field's value on your code. Now let us see this in action, right? How do we create the line item template content? How do we link it to your code template? How do we define the code line columns? So I'm on the template content, and I already have one content created for my line items. So this is going to be fairly simple. It just has the content name, and the type should be line items. The remaining is the same, the font family, text color, font size, table style. You could give all that here. It's fairly simple, not even as complicated as HTML template content type here. We are going to do the remainder of the configuration on our code template itself. So if I jump back to my code template, if you remember, we saw a few sections on its related tab. So one is the line columns, which we are going to come back just in a minute. And then the sections, right? So we need to create a section to reference the content that we have created to this particular code template. So I have created a line item section here. It's the same old fields that we looked at earlier. And if you notice here, I have linked the content that we created to this particular code template, right? So since this is a table, I just picked to use a border color. You can use any color you want, or you can leave it to the default. So remember, this is going to be the hexadecimal value. So ensure you're using the right value for the right color here. And I'm going to jump back to the related on my template. So if you look here, we have line columns, right? So we need to tell Salesforce CPQ which columns to display in the table, right? In the content, we define the line item content. It's just like more like a placeholder. This is where we are defining what columns we want to display in that particular table that lives on the code template, which is in the related list here under the line columns. So if I click on one of this, you would see that we have a column header, whatever you want the header to be, you just give that here. And then there is this display order. Where do you want to display this particular column in relation to other columns that you have in this table? Again, the same best practice, leave some gaps so that you're able to come and add anything else later if the need be, without reordering too many of them. And then you have a width here, and then there is a field name. Basically, this is where you are instructing Salesforce CPQ that I need the value for this column to come from this particular field. So please use the field's API name here. And one thing with respect to the width is it's technically the width of the column, right? It is percentage. The width of all the columns that you have in a table should add up to 100%. So just to make it look nice, ensure that width of all the columns add up to 100% once you've defined all your line columns. And then if I scroll down, there are some basic formatting like alignment, which can be done. You can say you want it to the left, you want it to the right. If you notice here, typically like how we would align your table. And then you have the font options, the styling information here. You could use them if need be. And then there is quite a bunch of fields here as well, right? So this is what we talked about, the conditional print field. So if you want this particular line column, which we have created, to only come up based on a value selected on your code, then that's what we would populate here. I'm quickly going to jump back so I can show you one column which I have created with the conditional print field on. So it's discount percentage. So if you notice here, what I have done is I have given a show discount field as my conditional print field here. So what this is going to do is this column will only be rendered if my show discount, I've created this custom field and have included it in the page layout for my quotes. And once a sales rep selects this show discount checkbox as yes on my code, only then this particular column will be rendered. If that is not set to true and if it's basically unchecked, then this column will not be rendered on your code line table for the section in your code document. Right, and let's quickly go back to our template. And I want to quickly show you about how we have grouped this, right? We said we want to group it by product family. So for that, if I go back to my section here, the line item section, if you see here, there is something called as a group field. So this is where we say how I want my line items to be grouped. For my use case here, I have done by product family. So you can actually go ahead and add a field. If you're not seeing it here, please go ahead and have the field API name to this particular pick list so that you see the options here. Since I wanted to use the product family, I've just picked the product family. And that is the reason we see our code line split into beautiful small little groups based on the product family, and we were able to see the subtotals in our code document. Let me quickly cancel here. And yeah, that's pretty much it, right? So this is how we create line item content, which is fairly simple. Just choose the type of content to be line item. You come back to your code template, create a section to link your content to your code template, and ensure you define all your line columns neatly, whichever column you want to be displayed on your table, and ensure you make use of the conditional print field if you want to dynamically display, show, or hide columns, and also the grouping functionality that Salesforce CPQ offers if you want to neatly group your line items into a smaller group of product family or any other field that you choose to on your code lines, and use these two functions to your advantage. One important thing that I also want to cover is it is possible to create multiple line item sections for the same code template, right? So you can have multiple sections for line items here. It is possible. So line columns can be assigned to a particular section, or you can use it across sections. So if you want to generate multiple line item sections with the same columns or different columns, we could do that. So if we do not specify the section on the line column, then it is going to apply to every line item section in the entire document. So if I jump into any of the line column, you have a field for a section here. So if it's technically blank, then it's going to apply this column for any other line item section. If I have multiple line item sections on this code document, this column is going to be available for all of them. If I specify it only to a particular section, then this is going to be available only on that line item section of the code document. So this is one important thing to note before we get onto our next type of content. Now that we built the HTML type of content and the next type of content, the line item type of content, let's quickly get on our code and see how this all comes into play, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you two things. So once I'm going to preview document, and I'm going to just say preview here. So if you notice here, we have our logo. This is because we gave our logo document ID. We uploaded this to the document and we gave this ID to the template. So that's why we see the company logo here. And then this is the cover letter that we saw earlier, right? So that's what we are saying, because the Marvel Studios is populated dynamically because that's the business name that is associated to the code. It has pulled in the date and the code expiry as well. And this is our HTML type of content that we built first. So if I scroll down even further, this is the other type of content that I built just to get the customer information. This is another HTML content type for getting the prepared for and the address of the customer and prepared by whom. If we scroll down even further, if you remember, we went and created the line item content, and while we defined the section and we associated it to the template, we defined a few things. One, we wanted it to be grouped by product family. That's why we see the code lines are grouped into hardware, software, swag here, right? So those are the product family, and anything that doesn't have a product family name associated gets grouped together and comes in the final table. So, and then we also see that we have a subtotal, basically the hardware total, the software total, the swag total, all that is being included here. And if you notice here, we have 5 columns: the quantity, product, description, unit price, and extended. The reason we don't see the discount percentage here is that we did not go ahead and check the show discount field, which is used as the conditional print field to show the column. And one other thing that I configured, which we didn't see in detail, is that I used the conditional print field on another section to show you how that would work on a section. So we have created a discount section earlier. Again, for demo purposes, I went ahead and created this. So what I did was I used the conditional print field here. I wanted to show a particular section only if this particular value returns to be true. So right now, we do not see that section, which will technically show you the discount value here. That's what the section does. And also, we are not seeing the column discount percentage in the line items table. So I'm going to quickly close this, cancel this, and show you what happens when I check this particular show discount field. So it's right here. I'm going to check this, and I'm going to click on save. And let's go ahead and preview document now. And let's see what we see here now. So if I scroll down, I should see a few things. One, the discount percentage column is now visible, right? So the Salesforce CPQ document engine has gone ahead and looked at the conditional print field and ensured that this column is displayed because we have checked the show discount to true. And if I scroll down, you will also notice this discount total has appeared here. So the discount total section was just to bring the discount total and then sum it up and show it at the bottom of this table. So this has also appeared here. So this is how the conditional print field will come into action while you generate documents. The same way was the group that we did in the line items, where we wanted to group it by product family and the subtotal for each of the categories. Now let us go ahead and look at the next type of content, right? The code term. Salesforce CPQ includes functionality to dynamically generate a number of terms and conditions. So the individual snippets of terms and conditions can be always shown or can be conditionally shown. For instance, like if Apple iPhone products are purchased on your code, then we want additional terms related to those products to render automatically when generating a document. So if that's a business case for you, we could do that as well while we define the code terms. So term conditions on code terms determine whether or not a term should display. So we have a separate related list for this to include your conditions under which circumstances that you want the code term to be shown or not. And if there are multiple conditions that you define, then you can use the conditions met field on the code term to let CPQ know whether to evaluate all of those conditions or any of those conditions in order for the code term to be displayed. We can also allow users to modify these terms by selecting modified terms from the code record. And again, I really want to exercise caution here when I say this, because Salesforce CPQ is not a contract lifecycle management application or a redlining tool. So please use these modified terms only and only if you need to. Code terms are intended to only handle lightweight modifications. So any modified code terms render in documents generated from the current code only, and they're not carried over to any other code like amendment or renewal codes. So if you're allowing your sales reps to go ahead and modify the terms on the fly while they're generating the documents, please note that they are touching the terms, and only give them the rights to do so if you really want them to modify it. It's like sections like legal information or liability information. You don't want anybody to go and make any modifications to those terms. So it's highly recommended to use this particular feature with caution. First, I'm on the template content. I've already created one for code terms. So technically, when you click new, the type you need to choose is code terms. This is fairly straightforward. There is nothing much that resides on the content itself. So we just need to give the content name, which is code terms, is what I have chosen to give here. And then the type is the code terms here. The remainder of the configuration, we would be doing it in our code template and the code terms object. So I'm going to quickly go back to our code template. If I go here, we will now link our template content to the code template itself through the sections. If you notice here, I have created a code term section to link the content which we created to the template itself. So if you notice here, so far we have not defined where the terms and condition itself reside, right? So we have not defined the individual snippets of language that needs to go into this section. So this is where code terms object comes into play. So we have an object called code terms where we are going to define the snippets of language that needs to go into terms and conditions. So if you notice here, I have several terms already described here. Just going to go ahead and click on one. And you would see the auto-generated term number, and then there's a type, and then a print order, which is technically the display order. This term should be displayed in which order relative to the other terms. And then we have an active checkbox to make this term active. Just below that, we see this locked field. So this checkbox is what would control whether the code term is going to be editable by a user or not. So if you lock this, which is ideally the state for any of your terms and conditions, which you don't want any other user to modify, if you have legal terms, if you have privacy terms, or any liability terms, ensure you lock it for editing so no other user can go and edit this particular term on their code document. And then now moving further, we have a parent term. So if you have multiple terms, child terms, then you could use this parent term field to say under which all the other terms and condition needs to group under. So this is where we will kind of link the definition to a definition header, right? So we can go multiple layers deep. And what Salesforce CPQ will do is it will dynamically number them when the document is generated. Then it's pretty much it. And then we have the template content itself that is here, which is related to the code term. So if I go to the related tabs here, you will notice there are term conditions. If you remember, I was mentioning that you could dynamically display this term condition based on what you define here. Say, for example, I have terms specific to the Apple iPhone 12, then I could just define a term condition here saying this term condition is what needs to be evaluated to show this particular code term. So I could use the tested field, or I could use the summary variable here to determine this, whether this condition is being met or not. So for our example, I could say if the product family belongs to, say, Apple phones, if that's a product family that I have, then I want this code term to be displayed. So that is what I would be populating it here. I'll quickly cancel out of this. And in case you have multiple term conditions, this field is very important, conditions met, because we would be saying whether Salesforce CPQ should evaluate all the conditions or any of the conditions for the code term to be dynamically shown on the code document. So the code template is where we control the numbering behavior of the terms. I was mentioning that we could auto number the terms and have all the child terms under a parent term, right? So the auto numbering behavior is driven from the code template itself. So if I scroll down here, we would see a field called number terms. Only if you check this checkbox, the Salesforce CPQ will automatically go and auto number your terms. Now let's quickly go and look at how do we modify terms on the code. So I'm on my code record, and if I press on this little arrow icon here, I would see modify code terms. So if I click on this, it takes me to this page where I would be able to choose a template. Since I just have one, I'm seeing it here. If you have multiple code templates, you would see that here. And if you notice here, if I'm hovering over any of these code terms, it says whether I can edit it or not. So if I have not locked the code term, it's going to allow me to edit it. If I click this little pencil icon here, I will be able to edit this particular code term. If you notice, I'm unable to edit the next code term. It says this code term is locked. And like I mentioned earlier, it's best practice to determine whether you want to give this privilege to the sales rep or not, because you don't want to go ahead and modify terms which you're not supposed to. But again, if you have the access to this, and if you want to allow your sales reps to modify the code term, this is where they could come on their code, click on the modify code terms, and modify their terms here. And like I mentioned earlier, this is only applicable for this particular code document, and any modifications that are done here will not be carried forward to any other codes or any amendment or renewal codes either. Now, let us quickly jump back into our code, and let's see how our code terms appear in our preview document. So I'm just going to click on preview document, and I'm going to see how the document looks like. So if I scroll down, so these are the terms and conditions we defined. If you notice here, Salesforce CPQ has gone ahead and auto numbered it. So because this was my parent term, that is numbered as 1, and all the child terms have been numbered as 1.1 and 1.2 here. And like I mentioned, if we have term conditions defined, then we could have these term conditions, fire whether the term should appear in this particular document or not. A typical example I mentioned was if we have Apple Watch products, then only then I want some terms and conditions related to the product to appear. So those could be configured using the term conditions on your code terms. Now that we looked at different types of the template content, let's move on and look at what additional documents are. So Salesforce CPQ also offers the capability to merge our template content with additional PDF content to produce the final document. So in addition to the code information, the customer information, the code lines, your signature block, a lot of times customers will want to include additional documents like, product information sheets or specification sheets, or even like marketing collateral or your company overview or the corporate overview as a document, right? So these information can be added as additional documents, and it could be included to your code document. Now let us quickly jump in back to Salesforce CPQ to see how do we add these additional documents and how does it look. Now let us see how do we add additional documents. So the first step is to upload the document into the Documents tab and then come back to your code template here. If you go to the related, we would see a section for additional documents. It's a pretty straightforward step. If you click on New here, you would be able to reference the record ID of the document and then give your document a name and the display order if you have multiple additional documents, whether you want this to be as your first additional document or the second or third or fourth. The same best practice applies here as well. Leave some gaps in between. And if this additional document is required, which means it should appear in all your code documents, then mark it as required here. So I've already gone ahead and added one additional document here, which is iPhone 12 product specification sheet. So in case you want to offer up certain content only when a product is quoted, we could create the additional document in a very similar way against the product itself in that case. Instead of creating additional document here on the code template, we could just go ahead and create it against the iPhone 12 product. So every time that product is quoted, then this additional document is available in the code document for selection. Only if the product is on the code, this additional document will show up on the available content on preview code for selection. Apart from this, users can additionally upload their own content as well. So if they want to upload their own PDF document, they could do that from the code. So if I quickly go back to the code, hit cancel here, you will see an option to include document. Again, this works in a very similar fashion. And you don't want to make this available if you don't want users to be inserting their own documents, but it's pretty straightforward. You just have to go browse and add your document, and your document will appear in your code document for selection. But otherwise, if I click on preview document here, if you see here, the additional document that we created against the code template is available here for selection. So I just need to select this and add it to my included content along with my code template content. And then if I click on preview, I should see this additional document that we added, the iPhone 12 specification in our code document. So if you notice here we see all the code template contents that we created, right? So our code template had this cover page, it had this customer information, the line item information, terms and condition, the signature block. So unless and until we add additional document, that's all you would see. But once you have additional documentations included, then even that would be embedded in this code document for the customer. So this is how you create additional document and include it to your code documents. Moving on, let us look at the allowed document file formats in Salesforce CPQ and the permissions involved. So Salesforce CPQ offers users to generate documents in two formats, Microsoft Word and PDF. So we can control the ability to generate the documents in Microsoft Word user by user basis. A single code template can support both formats. You don't need to create multiple templates to support each of these formats. So you just need to have one code template and both the formats would be supported. So code document represents a combination of the CPQ process best engineered to ensure the accuracy, consistency, so that we get a professionally looking document, correct? So just mainly for this reason, because we have such a great engineered process that Salesforce CPQ document engine offers, we recommend using PDF as your output format. However, if you want to have Microsoft Word as your output format, users with appropriate permission can choose the file format at the time of document generation. So you need to have a specific permission in order for you to choose Microsoft Word as your output format. And that is driven user by user basis. So if you go onto your user record, you would see allow output format change as a checkbox field there. And if you check this to true, only then the user would be able to generate document in Microsoft Word format. Like I mentioned earlier, the best practice is to restrict permissions to a very select users like your administrators, maybe some operations specialists, as you know, free editing of the code document counters the CPQ's control process. So you don't want to be like taking all caution all throughout your template contents, creating everything perfectly, using the Salesforce CPQ's document engine's powerful features all this way, and finally give up all that by giving the ability for the user to go ahead and modify the content there. So be very cautious when you give permissions to allow output format change to users. I'm back on my code, and when I click on generate document, this is the place where we see the output format as a field mentioned here. So because for my user record, I have enabled the checkbox to true for the output format change, I'm seeing Microsoft Word as one of the formats here. And once I select it as PDF or Microsoft Word, and then I download my document, I should be able to see my document generated in that particular format chosen. Let me quickly go and show you where this particular field resides. So if I go on to my user detail, you will notice that there is a field for allow output format change. So only because this checkbox is checked to true, I'm seeing Microsoft Word as one of the output format options. Otherwise, PDF is the only format options that I would see. If we are using both formats like PDF and Microsoft Word, one recommendation is test both of them as you build, because small inconsistencies might occur with the format. So don't assume that testing PDF is fine and we don't need to test Microsoft Word separately. You might be surprised that you might find some inconsistencies between both these formats while you're testing. Now that we have defined our code template itself with the multiple different template contents, and we saw how to configure additional document, let's quickly go ahead and see how our document looks like. I'm going to click on generate document on my code. And my document language is English. I have the correct template selected here. I want it in the PDF format, and everything looks fine. I'm going to add my iPhone 12 product specification sheet as well. And then I'm going to quickly preview here. Let me quickly go ahead and download it. I'm going to just save it and open it to see how it looks like. So this is the code document that we built today. So we have our company logo here. We have our cover page. We have our customer information, the prepared for with the address dynamically generated, our prepared by information, our line items, which are grouped by product family, and which has subtotals listed here. And we have the discount percentage column and the discount section appearing here because we have showed discount on our code set to true. And we have conditional print fields that brings this dynamically on this document. We have our terms and conditions that we define, and they're auto numbered by Salesforce CPQ. We have our signature block. And if I scroll even further, we have our additional document, which is iPhone 12 product specification, which is listed here. So if I quickly jump back to this code itself and then click on save, you will notice that a code document is generated against this code. So this is the document name. We have the code associated with it. This is the first version, and it has the template that it is associated with. Our output format was PDF. So all that is listed here. So this is how we generate a code document. Before we wind up this session, I wanted to quickly touch upon two other features that are involved in the document generation. One is multi-language translation. So to enable the multi-language translation in our CPQ package settings under documents section, you would see this particular checkbox called enable multi-language translations. Please ensure this is checked. This would allow sales reps to generate code documents in one of the org's supported languages. We must also have translated values stored for the languages that they can select. I urge you to go and look at help.salesforce articles in relations to multi-language translations so that you understand how you could create separate template contents for different languages for which you require translations. Finally, when we generate document, we have options for e-signature. So Salesforce CPQ offers one-click e-signature integrations with DocuSign and Adobe Sign. So instead of your sales rep downloading the document, mailing it to the customer, getting it signed, physically shipping the copy back, it's really not a very easy process, right? And we could use these digital e-signature platforms, which Salesforce CPQ already has integrations with like DocuSign and Adobe Sign, and we could use these integrations for getting the e-signatures done in an easier manner. There are add-on packages for that for Salesforce CPQ to work with these e-signature applications. Again, I urge you to look at help.salesforce articles in relation to e-signature integrations. I have not covered that in depth in this session, but there's a lot of informative articles in help.salesforce, and please go ahead and look at them in detail. To summarize, in today's session, we looked at an overview of Salesforce CPQ's document engine, how do we generate document, and the different types of template contents. We mainly looked at HTML line items and the code terms in detail. And we also looked at how do we configure additional documents and include it in our code documents. We looked at few additional functionalities around the line item sections. And we also took a deep dive into Salesforce CPQ to see how all this comes into play while we generate documents and all the different formats Salesforce CPQ allows us to generate documents in and the permissions needed. And we quickly finally touched upon our e-signature integrations and multi-language translations. Thank you for listening in. Hope you found the session informative. Thank you, Apex Hours, for giving us the opportunity to host this session today.